The Seattle Seahawks finished the 2022 season with a 9-8 record and made the playoffs after missing out on the playoffs in the 2021 season. It was a very unexpected trip to the postseason relative to the preseason expectations, as there was seemingly no way that Geno Smith of all people would lead this team to a winning record and ultimately a playoff appearance. But that's exactly what happened, and after the Broncos had a tumultuous 2022 season, Seattle had an unexpected top 5 pick and used it on corner Devin Witherspoon from Illinois. This came after a year in which they selected corner Tariq Woolen, and all Tariq did in his rookie year was tie for leading the league in interceptions. And a year after a lot of people, myself included, thought the future was very murky in Seattle, well, they have built a damn good team and one that will compete for a very long time. There are some people that think Geno Smith was a one-year wonder and that he will not be able to sustain the success he had in the 2022 season, and we will certainly address that in today's video. But believe it or not, the Seattle Seahawks can win the Super Bowl. I know that may sound like a hot take, but we're going to dive into why this team is so good and why they will seriously compete this year. Now let's begin. And we are starting today's video by saying that there were a lot of things that went right for Seattle in 2022, and I mean a lot of things that went right for Seattle last year. Geno Smith threw for 30 touchdowns, they had a pair of 1,000-yard receivers in DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, and even had a 1,000-yard rusher in rookie Kenneth Walker. And if you followed the Seahawks 2022 season, then you know they had a very, very good draft class, and really that's underselling how good of a draft this was, but I didn't want to use the word legendary after a single season. From this class alone, they had left tackle Charles Cross, the aforementioned Kenneth Walker, Abraham Lucas, Kobe Bryant, and of course Tariq Woolen. And this is without mentioning a player that could develop in second-year pass rusher Boye Mafe. But for everything the Seahawks did right, one thing they could not do last year that continuously bit them in the rear end was not being able to stop the run. And when you have Tariq Woolen at corner, who is a ball hawk by every definition, it's much easier for teams to say, alright, fine, you got us. We're going to either throw away from Tariq altogether, as we don't want to take our chances with a guy who's 6'4" and can run a sub-4 440, or we can run the ball right at you and basically say, stop us. And Seattle finished 30th in rushing yards allowed last year, 27th in rushing touchdowns allowed, and 26th in average yards per carry defensively. And with opposing teams having this much success running the ball, it should not come as a surprise that they also finished 30th in carries against them. For reference, they finished 10th in passing attempts allowed, so the play calling was very skewed one way, as out of the 18 games they played in 2022, including the wildcard loss to San Francisco, they allowed 150 yards rushing or more as a team 9 times. And out of those games they allowed 150 yards or more rushing, 5 of those games were actually 180 yards or more. And not surprisingly, Seattle was 0-5 in those games. And when every team, not just Seattle, enters the offseason, there's several questions, but the one big question they ask themselves is, how can we get better at our weakest point while also getting good enough to win the division? And conveniently or inconveniently for Seattle, depending on how you look at it, their biggest weakness in 2022 was stopping the run, which is the 49ers' biggest strength, running the football. And not every team's offseason outlook aligns like Seattle's did last year. And align in this scenario meaning a division rival is great at what you are not great at, in the Seahawks case, bad at stopping the run. And if you think about it, truly where is Seattle bad aside from their run defense? Or at least where were they bad heading into the offseason? Because they addressed the run defense in a big way through free agency and the draft. And to me, the answer is nowhere. And they had to beef up their run defense this offseason, and they did in multiple ways by bringing in Draymond Jones and Jaron Reed in free agency, along with the return of a player that Seahawks fans are very familiar with in the 6-time first-team All-Pro player, Bobby Wagner. And we mentioned a lot of things that went right for the Seahawks in 2022, but not being able to defend the run cost them a lot of games last year that they had no business losing, or at least they shouldn't have lost in the manner they did. And out of the 8 regular season losses they had last year, 2 were to the 49ers, 1 was to the Chiefs, and 1 was to the Bucks in Germany, meaning 4 of their 8 losses came against playoff teams, and 3 of those losses were against teams that were in the Final Four, and of course 1 was to the eventual Super Bowl champions. And there's no shame in losing to these teams, especially to the Niners and Chiefs, as they are continuously amongst the best in the league. But the other 4 losses were to teams that all had top 10 draft picks. And if you've watched any of the team previews, there's one thing that I emphasize with the elite teams, and it's that they can't afford to lose teams they shouldn't, especially in the AFC, because every game means that much more, and there is little room for error. And for Seattle to lose to the Falcons, Raiders, and Panthers in 2022, all of which were at home, is something that absolutely cannot happen in 2023. And their other loss to a team with a top 10 pick was to the Saints, which was in New Orleans, and that's a little more understandable than the other 3. Seahawks fans, please feel free to voice your opinion on this, but I would imagine the Panthers' loss was the worst out of these because within this game, Seattle allowed over 220 yards rushing, turned the ball over twice to Carolina's 0, and only held the ball for 21 of the 60 minutes. And this is a take I've said on the channel before that I'll say again, but I don't think there's a more frustrating feeling than when you simply can't get off the field because you can't stop the run. And while Pete Carroll and John Schneider obviously weren't happy with any of the 49ers' losses, including the wildcard round loss, I think they were most frustrated after the Panthers' loss, because they let Sam Darnold go into Lumen Field, throw for only 120 yards, and win by nearly double digits. Granted, the final score was 30-24, but Seattle scored a touchdown with 16 seconds left to make it a one-score game. And this was the main goal for the Seahawks offseason: ensure these types of losses do not happen again in 2023. And of course, extending quarterback Geno Smith, which they successfully did. And starting off on the right foot for Seattle is going to be critical for them in 2023 because they have a very early bye week. Their bye is in week 5, and the way I see this for the 2023 Seahawks outlook is I see this as a massive inconvenience, especially with a 17-game season. I don't usually emphasize bye weeks unless they are very early, like this one, or if a team has a week 14 bye, just a couple of weeks before the postseason starts. And what's particularly a brutal stretch for them is weeks 12 through 15, when they play the 49ers 2 times in a 3-week span, and sandwiched between the 49ers games is a road trip to Dallas. I know people like to get their jokes in about the Cowboys and how they haven't been to the NFC Championship game since 1995, but they are one of 2 teams to have 12 wins in each of the last 2 years, and the other team is the Chiefs. They're a very good team, and after these 3 for Seattle, they play home against Philly in week 15. What's also not great about the Seahawks schedule this year is they, along with all of the other NFC West teams, play the AFC North this year, and when you play a division, you want to play the better teams at home, as that's obviously going to give you a better chance of winning, but unfortunately for Seattle, they play both Cincinnati and Baltimore on the road, and obviously since Seattle is tucked away in the upper Northwest, their road trips are already going to be further than most teams, and both of these games, meaning Cincinnati and Baltimore, are after their week 5 bye. If there is any positive to the Seahawks schedule this year, the final few games are a lot easier than most other NFL teams. Obviously, no NFL game is an easy win, but playing the Titans, Steelers, and Cardinals for the final 3 games are a lot easier than playing the 49ers twice and the Eagles during this stretch. And with Seattle's final game being in Arizona, hopefully they have a playoff berth locked up by then to where they could give their starters a rest before the postseason, because at that point in the year, any little bit helps. But the Seahawks offense this year is going to be a problem for opposing defenses because they can beat you any way they want. Whether it's with Geno throwing for 300 yards or Kenneth Walker going for 100 on the ground and a pair of scores too. We discussed the run defense and how much that should improve this year, but with the additions of Jackson Smith-Njigba and Zach Charbonnet in the draft, they're only getting better for an offense that already finished top 10 in scoring last year and can easily finish in the top 10 again this year. And assuming most guys stay healthy for Seattle in 2023, I would be pretty disappointed if this offense doesn't finish in the top 10 in scoring, because they have an answer for everything. I absolutely loved the Zach Charbonnet selection, because if they want to protect Kenneth Walker for the latter parts of the season, or even give him a break, they can. And Charbonnet was my third ranked running back in the draft process, and sure, he won't put up the numbers in Seattle he may have elsewhere, but there's a chance the Seahawks use him and Kenneth Walker like the Packers did with Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon in 2022, where they combine for nearly 400 carries and their carries are almost split down the middle. And within this sector of the offense, time of possession is going to be huge for Seattle this year, because they will need to stay fresh later in the year, and having that insanely early bye week does not benefit them in the long run. They finished 23rd in offensive time of possession last year and 25th defensively, and a lot of that was due to the run game. And if they can shift this more into their favor by using the duo of Walker and Charbonnet the way they can, their guys are going to be in a lot better shape by the time January rolls around. And this is coming from a team that finished 7th in yards per carry last year. From a stat sheet standpoint, I don't think any of the receivers are going to kill it or be 1,400 plus yard players, which is fine because they don't have to be in this offense. And that also applies to the running backs for that matter too. And for the Geno crowd that thinks he was a one-year wonder, there's one play specifically I refer to in his 2022 season that made my jaw drop when I watched it, and it was against the Saints. For Geno to fit this football into Tyler Lockett in quarters coverage is downright insane, and if he was making these types of jaw-dropping throws, do we really think Geno lost his ability, or whatever crutch people want to use to discredit Geno heading into 2023? I don't think Geno regressed or lost his powers, or whatever the reason people want to downplay what Geno can do heading into this year is, especially when the talent around him is amongst the best in the NFL. But defensively, the Seahawks pass rush should be better this year, and this is where the secondary will help out the pass rush, because when Tariq and Devin Witherspoon and both safeties and Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs are taking care of business in the back end, the front four can get after the quarterback in a big way. Seattle did not have a player have 10 plus sacks last year, but they had two guys have 9.5 sacks each, with Darrell Taylor and Uchenna Nwosu. Whether they get to 10 sacks or even Boye Mafe for that matter, to me doesn't really matter, because a pressure with this secondary is a lot of the time going to be as good if not better than a sack. Opposing quarterbacks are not going to want to test this secondary repeatedly, and a statistic the Seahawks may lead in this year is passes thrown away, because when quarterbacks are under pressure, whether it's chuck it to their guy or just play it safe and chuck it out of bounds, I think they're going to just throw it out of bounds against this team specifically. I don't necessarily think it's going to be a Legion of Boom 2.0 per se, as that's extremely unfair expectations to this 2023 roster, but I really like the future of this team. And it's not just in one area. They have not one but two good young running backs that can milk the clock and stay pretty fresh throughout the game by having the other back play a series while the other one rests. They have three good receivers, and granted Lockett is aging, but JSN and DK can be here for a while, and they drafted two starting tackles in the 2022 draft. The pass rush is solid and will only get better with experience, and this team went from an afterthought to being one of the better constructed rosters and having a great long-term outlook in a single off-season. Obviously, this season is going to be tough, but if they play their cards right, they can win the Super Bowl. They have the talent, and heading into the season, I would not sleep on the Seattle Seahawks. The team MVP, breakout player, ceiling, and floor are on the screen, and I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel, as only about 24% of people watching are subscribed, and it makes a massive difference. And until the next team preview, please be safe, and have a great day. Love you guys.